Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy. This is the Gerber Knives Fastball. So, first off, I want to thank very much my Patreon patrons for making it possible not only for me to buy a $100 knife without any hesitation, but actually to buy two of them to check the quality control with a similarly small amount of hesitation. I'm a very lucky man, and I appreciate their support very, very much. Allows me to buy these things independently to really do those kinds of checks. Next thing, let's do a size comparison. Here it is against your Spicodelica, your Ontario rat number. This is a PM2, and your Ontario rat number 2 here. And so what we can see is that size-wise, in terms of sharpened blade length, we're not so far off the rat 2, but also in terms of handle size, we're not so far off the rat 2. It's a relatively compact knife, although the blade itself comes in at just a little bit under 3 inches here. So that's a beautiful thing. And then one of the little bit of comparison I'd like to do is actually on the thickness front. If we compare this guy right here to the rat number 2, we can see it is about equivalently thin as the rat 2 here, or similarly to the Spicodelica. Yeah, it's not a very thick knife at all. That's a joy. Definitely a big fan of the thinness on this guy. So that's your size. Next thing, this knife is actually, I've had a little bit more personal interaction with the designer than usual. To start with, I actually ended up sitting with the guy at, unintentionally, at the Blade Show banquet, right? And, you know, we started talking because we're geeks and we're talking about knives, and that's cool. And so, you know, he and I ended up, a guy named Seth, nice guy enough, but he had a prototype in his pocket, and I swung by the next day. That's actually how I discovered this guy. But actually, both Tony Scullenbrady of Gear Geeks Live and Everyday Commentary and I were impressed enough with this that we actually asked the designer to come on to the Gear Geeks Live podcast and kind of talk us through exactly how this guy was done. You know, how did the design process go? And so if you're curious about this design or about the process of designing a knife for a big company like Gerber, I'd encourage you to listen to that episode. That'll bring you some joy. And then finally, one other thing that I should probably disclose, I guess, is that I'm actually going to go up to the Gerber factory here in the U.S., up in there in Portland, in the next month or so here, and later this month, and go and take a visit. They're going to give me a full factory tour. I'm going to talk to some of their people because they're really trying to be serious about rebuilding their brand. And what I mean by that is trying to get back into the enthusiast market. And so they want to show me, you know, what it is they're doing. And frankly, I, on my end, want to learn more about how the industry works on that large of a scale. They're doing things at a very different domain than the places I've visited before, and so that seems like a good opportunity. But I'm trying my best not to let that opportunity affect my review, and I hope you'll agree that I'm being fair no matter what. So, anyways, there you go. That's what's going on here. Let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of the Gerber Knives Fastball here. So on the good side, to start with, it's made in the States. You know, that's a beautiful thing. I cheer for manufacturing in my home country, as I imagine many of you do as well. So, you know, there you go. That's definitely a beautiful thing. Next thing many of you do in your own home country. I'm not saying everyone's cheering for us, but whatever. Nevertheless, that can be a great thing for some folks. Next thing, this has a very nice clip. You can see here it is a relatively straightforward spring clip here, but it's well sprung. There are no real problems with it there. The positioning of it is good. It hangs the pocket, it hangs the blade nicely in the pocket, canted off to the side here, keeping the flipper tab out of the way. That's good. And it's smartly placed such they can be either right side or left side carried. And each one will work about equivalently well. So that's actually very, very nice. Next thing, the flipper tab on this guy, although it's certainly prominent, is rounded enough on both this dimension as well as this one that it is not a terribly, you know, pernicious pocket pecker, if you will. Yeah, sure, it'll attack whatever else is in your pocket, but not to a huge extent, and that's a beautiful thing. Next thing, this guy has a nice back spacer. It's more of a design touch than anything, but it does add a little bit of texturing here in the back, and it makes it a little bit harder for this guy to slip out of your hand, etc., as does the overall contouring, etc. But nevertheless, I do like the back spacer on it. It's a nice little touch, and that recessedness, there you go, good to go. Next thing, nice blade. This is made of S30V steel. See here, S30V. S30V is a steel that is absolutely good to go. No freaking problems with it. It is a high-end knife steel. Some people disagree with that statement, but I like S30V. It's just fine. And it is actually a relatively thin stock, and I love that so very much. If we compare it to the Spicodelica, you can see here the stock is about equivalently thick. Unfortunately, the Delica has a full flat grind. This guy has a saber grind, so this is considerably thicker behind the edge than the Delica, but nevertheless, I do appreciate that they went with thinner stock. That'll be nice if you're cutting apples, things like that. Yeah, there you go. That's the blade. Next thing, this has a super strong detent. And in fact, all of the ones of these I've handled at Blade Show, as well as the two that I've purchased, have very strong, very clicky detents. They're very satisfying. As a knife geek, this is a good detent. They also have reasonable shutting action here. If I kind of pop that shut, yeah, Once you get past that detent ramp, it just goes shut real easy. It's on bearings. There you go. That's the word I wanted. But the detent on this is absolutely good to go. This is a high-quality detent. This one's almost a little bit strong. These are some serious detents they're putting in this, and that's a beautiful thing. Next thing, this carries well. Not only is it relatively small, I mean, again, I compare it to your Delica here, and this is really pretty small in terms of footprint, but it's also very thin, and it's also quite lightweight. This is a knife that carries beautifully, and part of that is because they've made it consciously designed to be thin. You can see here that it's actually slightly asymmetrical. They have the aluminum scales on both sides, but they only have a liner on one side. They've actually done a very nice little thing where they've used the pivot here as the bearing race. You'll see in my disassembly exactly how that works, but it's kind of brilliant, and it allows a thinner knife than otherwise you would expect. So I'm kind of digging that. And as a result, it's a thin knife, and it's very easy to carry. So that's a beautiful thing. Next thing, it is actually reasonably lightweight as well. Coming in just under 3 inches, and we are coming in here at 2.79 ounces. That is a little bit under an ounce an inch, so I can't argue with that. This carries beautifully, and on a day when you just want to throw something in the pocket, this works nicely just thrown in the pocket. Very good. And then finally, honestly, I think it's a good design. It's got a lot of really nice little details here. You've got, for instance, this little area wrapping around the back here is nice. You've got the nice, what am I saying here? Your nice back spacer. The clip positioning is brilliant, you know, complementing the lanyard hole and whatnot. I think the design on it overall is quite nice, and frankly, I like a good Warncliffe style blade. I think this is a reasonably good knife design, and especially when they're doing the neat things like the pivot here. Oh yeah. So I definitely like the design. And the lanyard hole, by the way, I find attractive, and I don't generally find lanyard holes attractive. So I think this is a nice little design, and frankly, it's a smart design. Aesthetically speaking, it's not like, oh my God, the most beautiful thing ever, but in the hand, then, functionally speaking, it works very well. So to me, at least, that's what's great. That's what's good here. Is it's got a nice design. It's reasonably lightweight. It is very thin in the pocket with a super strong detent, a nice blade, a nice backspacer, a good clip, and it is made in the USA, which will be very important to some people. On the great side, they are trying really hard here. Now, that is not meant to be a dig. That is a statement of respect for the effort. What I mean by that is that, you know, Gerber in the U.S. factory has never made an unassisted flipper before, and that's actually not trivial. I mean, some of us remember the time when makers were still trying to figure out how to do unassisted flippers well. In fact, some makers still are. But the detent is not a trivial thing to nail. But first time at the plate, they nailed it. This is a really nice detent, I have to say. This one particularly is very strong. But nevertheless, they nailed the detent. They've done this new thing with the pivot as the liner on the other side for the bearings to roll against, and that's kind of cool too. I mean, it's obvious to me that they spent a bunch of time trying to make this knife as good as it possibly can be, and it shows a great deal of effort. And that's something that I felt has been lacking in some of the other designs you see, especially on the super low budget end, from them in the past. And so seeing that, and seeing the effort that they're making to make this correctly here in the States is a beautiful thing. And so, to me, what's great about this is that this knife represents a level of effort and a level of outreach to the knife community that is a little bit unexpected from me, honestly, and is quite refreshing to see. So what's great here is that they're trying. It's very clear that they want this to be an olive branch handed to the knife, the knife community, above and beyond the blister pack folks who they've been marketing to for the last little while. So that's a beautiful thing. On the bad side, to start with, the screws are going straight into the scale on the other side. It's not the end of the world, and it is going into liner as well, but still, never a big fan of that, because if you strip these screws out, or strip out these screw holes, that is, your knife is dead rather than just your Chicago-style screws or something like that, or your barrel spacer. Whatever, not a huge deal. Next thing, this lacks a detent ball ramp, and so there is a very strong amount of effort required to go from here to here. Is it a big deal? No, but it's something they could improve relatively straightforwardly, and I hope they do in the future. Next thing, as you can see here on the liner on this guy has, I learned a new term in this process, which is die tear. Basically, because these parts are stamped out, you can see a little bit of evidence of the tearing associated with that process on the edge here, and so these liners end up looking a little bit beat up relative to the liners you see on a lot of other knives, like, for instance, this guy right here, which is the Ontario Rat number 2. You can see the liners are just beautifully finished throughout. So that is left right there, and it definitely adds a little bit of like, oh, Well, that's kind of a shame. And it makes the knife feel a little bit lower in fit and finish than, a lot of the competition. Next thing, the proud liner in the middle here. You can see here that the liner sticks up a little bit beyond both sides of the scale. This makes it very easy to unlock, which can be nice, but it also pokes into your finger as you bear down on this. If you're gripping hard, you are definitely 100% going to feel that liner right sticking up there. So I'm generally a fan of something where you've got more scalloping on this side and a liner that's flush, just ergonomically speaking. Not the end of the world, and usually you're not going to be gripping that hard, but it's definitely something there. Next thing, the detent on this guy, on this particular knife, is a little bit too strong. The other one, the first one I got, actually has a detent that I like a little bit more. It's a little bit softer. It's by far adequate, but it's a little bit softer. This guy, there have been times where I've went to flip it, and it was just like, oh, I've slipped off rather than flipping. So this points to a little bit of variation, and that's in detent strength, that is, and that's always a little bit frightening. There you go. And then finally on the bad side, the price on this guy is a little bit higher than I'd like to see. It's coming in at $100. Now, look, this is not a bad price necessarily for the knife, because I can very easily see a knife in a good unassisted flipper, an S30V, hitting $100. But the thing is, there are a lot of comparable knives out there that are a little bit difficult. I mean, knives from companies like Ruwaiki, whatever the heck, Civivi, I've got one over here. I mean, knives from like Spyderco, the Chaparral at XHP, Steel Wheel, Real Steel, even Kershaw are shipping knives for, half the price of this that feel, honestly, very impressive in terms of things like fit and finish and whatnot, where the finishing is a little bit higher end. And so this doesn't feel as impressive in terms of finishing relative to the competition. And so, it has a good steel. And in fact, it has a better steel than most of the pieces I mentioned. This, the XHP aside, I'd say is about on even footing. But still, that's not something I'm particularly in love with. And given that this has the good steel, it's made in the States, it's not so bad, provided that it's being well done. But the thing is, at $100, Gerber is running it with the big dogs. They are against some really serious competition, and they are targeting higher-end competition. They're targeting higher-end enthusiasts. There are a lot of people for whom $100 is a very expensive knife, and there are definitely knives that are made more cheaply, like the Civivis here, that feel a lot more expensive, whereas this guy is expensive, but it feels like it's made more cheaply. So they're making compromises that some enthusiasts might not love in finishing, and particularly at the edge there, that I think they don't necessarily need to be making, or at the very least that it's sad to see them making. So unless the three letters here on the blade, USA, mean more to you than anything else, they're really going to have to earn that price. They can ask that price if they're shipping perfection, if they're working on the finishing issues, but they're going to need to either amp up the quality control to meet it, or drop the price down to reflect a couple of little cut corners there. I get it. It's expensive to pay people in the States, but this is definitely feeling a little bit higher in terms of price and a little bit lower in terms of finishing than I'd kind of like to see at that kind of a price. So, anyways, that's to me the bad, is that the price is a little bit high relative to some of the competition, although it's definitely got some advantages. The detent on this particular model is a little bit too strong, although this one's good to go. The proud line is a little bit painful. You can see this die tear on the outside, which just makes the knife feel a lot cheaper than it actually is. It needs a detent ball ramp, and the screws are going straight into the other side. On the ugly front, there are two issues here. One is that it is super thick behind the edge. It's relatively thin blade stock, but if you look here, it is expanding out to the full thickness of that blade stock very quickly. So as a result, this doesn't really cut as satisfyingly as I'd like it to. A knife with thin blade stock, a relatively compact knife, in my estimation, really should cut. Certainly, this kind of an edge is going to be harder to damage if you're doing stupid things like like turning flathead screws or something like that. But knives should cut, not pry, and I really don't like the thickness of this edge. There are many companies and many knives out there. The $30 Ontario Rat 2 has this beautifully thin edge right here. And again, if we look at the tip here, and the tip is the thickest part, oh man, I don't really care for the thickness of this edge. The other issue with the edge is that it didn't come super sharp. It's stropped up okay, but still, there was a visible burr left over on both of the ones I've got here that I ended up having to knock down a little bit. And that's just not a beautiful thing. So on the ugly front, it's super thick behind the edge. The other issue on the ugly front is actually quite ugly. The biggest issue that I had with this guy is that the very first one I purchased both of these actually just through Amazon, because I figured that would be the least controlled, shipping, purchasing experience ever. If anybody was just going to grab one off the box and ship it my way, they would be the people to do it. And you know what? The first one I have was just bad, because take a look at this freaking blade. I don't actually think that it is warped. I think what we're seeing here is a combination of really bad centering as well as a grind that's very asymmetrical. But I took one look at this and realized, no, that's not okay. And honestly, this isn't okay. You know, at $25, this would be something I'd probably send back. At $100, no way, no way. And so this, to me, is a sign that their factory is struggling to hit the higher mark they set in their attempt at a comeback here, both in terms of grind and sharpening, detent consistency, and finishing generally. And so, if Gerber is indeed trying to make a comeback or move into the high end, they cannot afford to let a knife like this out the door. This is a $100 knife, and this is what they shipped. That's not okay. I purchased the second one, and the second one is good to go, although, like I said, the detent is super hard. But this second one is absolutely fine. Quality-wise, there were no issues, but they really, really need to do better than this. They need to earn. If they're going to come back, they need to earn it. It needs to be better than just good. They can't do good enough. If you're bending metal, you can't just bend it straight. You have to bend it back in order for it to get straight, right? And this is the same situation. They can't let these leave the factory, because if somebody who gives a damn gets one of them, they will send it home, tell their friends, and mentally file Gerber away in the trunk drawer. I mean, seriously, if I hadn't handled a bunch of these that were really good to go when I first, at Blade Show, I would have assumed like, oh, well, never mind. Why am I bothering here? I gave him a second shot. And in fact, the second shot, which was done the same way as the first one, came out okay, but that's a little bit concerning. And so, honestly, I feel like they need to have the VP of the damn company or something sitting at the end of the production line. And if they get something like this saying, nope, no, we're coming back, and tossing this guy into the slag pile, or at least, sending it back for some more work. I mean, I know that that's really expensive, but the thing is, perfection quality control right now, as you're trying to stage a comeback, is so much cheaper than losing yet another generation of knife enthusiasts to poor factory quality control. They say that they're working on it, and that it takes time, and you know what? I believe them. There's no doubt about that, but the competition is very strong, and the quality control from the competition is very good. And patience is limited, even for people who want Gerber to come back. So I'm sorry, but this isn't okay. No excuses. That doesn't work. And so, to me, soliloquy aside, I mean, for now, what this means in your everyday life is that you're going to want to probably buy this where you've got an option to return it, or go someplace better still where you can just pick one out for yourself. Open up a bunch of boxes, see how it is. It's like, oh, yeah, this one's good to go. Great. And problem solved. There are great examples out there. And this is a sample of two, so I can't say too much about it. But the thing is, and my buddy Tony got one, his was perfect. Mine was pretty damn good the second time around. But still, buyer beware. If they're willing to ship one of these, they might probably willing to ship another one, and you might get that other one. So make sure you buy someplace where that's not a problem. So on the ugly front, we have a whole soliloquy about quality control, because this one was really bad, and it is super thick behind the edge, which is something I'd like them to see. I'd like to see them do a little bit better as they're getting toward the higher end. Final conclusion-wise, this knife actually came out of nowhere for me. This was one of my surprises of Blade Show 2019. I had kind of forgotten that Gerber was a thing in the enthusiast market, and it feels like Gerber had forgotten that the enthusiast market was a thing for a little while there. But nevertheless, I hadn't paid a lot of mind. But then I actually handled one of these guys, and it was actually shockingly good. And it really is shockingly good. It's a manual, unassisted flipper. It's got a blade with a good steel. It's got a strong detent. It's lightweight. It's thin. It's a very nice design, and it's made in the U.S. And I see that there's a huge amount of effort that's gone into making this as good as it can. And when I handled one at Blade, it was like kind of a moment of like, oh, well, that's cool, awesome. And so I came back and I ordered one damn near immediately. But unfortunately, it is a knife that still has some issues. It's still got a couple of little cut corners here to hit the price point. The detent here is a little over strong, and I hope that variability isn't too high. It has a price point that puts it a little bit above, and thus a little bit behind some of the overseas-made competition. It is a super thick and kind of dull edge in both of these cases, and there were some signs that even though their executives are ready for the enthusiast market, their QC team isn't. And those things pull it away away from gem territory. But I wind up feeling ultimately like this is a shockingly good knife now, and it could be a really great knife. It could be a gem with a couple of tweaks. It is a great design. It is a very impressive first effort coming back into the enthusiast market. For a first $100 knife, this actually is pretty good from Gerber. However, they could do little things. Little detent ball ramp, grind it a little bit thinner, work on keeping detents consistent, and hire somebody to be the biggest jerk in the world about QC until they're shipping perfect every time. If they do that, this could go from shockingly good to gem. This could be a really easy knife to recommend. And that's how they could win the enthusiast market back. And you know what? Honestly, I hope that they do, because we need more good USA-made factories working. We need more good factories, generally speaking, but here in the States, all the better for us. We need better mid-range folders, something in this kind of a price point rather than, $200 is $20. I like seeing things in the middle there. We need more exposure of good knives to retail shelves. I mean, can you imagine how much good having an excellent unassisted flipper on the shelf in every Walmart could do for the community? Can you imagine? Oh, that would be such a beautiful thing. And it's very clear that they've put in a Herculean effort to get this far. So, ultimately, it is a surprisingly good knife, and it is a good knife, generally speaking. It's let down by a couple of little issues and a little bit of corner cutting from here and there. But I gotta say, I'm very impressed with this piece, and I very, very much hope that the fastball is only the first pitch in a long game ahead of Gerber's march back towards the enthusiast market. So there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.